Such a lovely hymn. Such a lovely hymn. Why, Paul writes in Romans, why do you despise your brother or your sister? Why do you despise your brother or sister? Oh, Father Mark, I don't despise anybody. Really? Really? Who are you mad at today? Who do you have trouble forgiving, and for what? And what have you not been forgiven for? What, perhaps, have you not forgiven God for? What, perhaps, will you not believe that God has forgiven you for? Those are the questions in our text today. Matthew's community is a church. And come on, there's just going to be fights in church. There just are. And how many here have left the church mad? How many here are mad now? No, I'm just kidding. No, oh, Steve, you put that hand down. But really, so many of us have had that time in our life where we just felt, and see, we think about church as being like just one, this church as being one of many options, and I know that's probably what it is, right? It's like we're in a great big land and there's lots of choices, or in a great big city, but in Matthew's community, it's more like this, like what you see in the ceiling. You know, churches are built as naves, comes from the word navis, comes from like a navy, right? So turn the church upside down, it's really a boat. That's really what it is here. Like, if you get mad at somebody on a boat, what are you going to do? You know, you hide out in your room, or you jump overboard, or you throw them. Right? And that's really what's going on. So Matthew's community, of course, churches fight. They just do. That's because we're human. They do. And really, church fights leave deep and lasting wounds. That's why they're important to get. That's why it's so important to get things out in the open and talk about them before it becomes a deep, deep resentment and somebody ends up leaving. Because nobody ever ends up leaving and feeling good. The community feels bad and the person feels bad. I can tell you from personal experience. So Matthew says he has Peter come and talk to, in the text, and talk to Jesus and say, what should I do? You know, and Peter says, and Jesus says, keep together, confront each other in love, admit your mistakes, ask for forgiveness, and forgive. That's what we need to know. And it works in churches, and it works in schools, and it works in hospitals, and it works in jobs, and it works in life. And it's important. So, Jesus tells this great parable. Have you heard this parable before about the slave who had so much forgiven and then wouldn't even forgive a little bit? Who are you in that story? Do you think? Probably depends on where you are when you hear it, or where you are in your life. But I want to tell you a couple things about it. First of all, the magnitude of the forgiveness. How frustrating it is to have someone come to you and do the same thing over and over and over and over and over to offend you, right? This happens a lot in jobs, you know. Somebody's just annoying you, yeah? The same person does the same stupid thing. Or it happens in relationships, right, too, yeah. And so Peter says, how many times do I have to forgive the same dumb thing? It's been happening over and over. The same person. And should even 7 times, then can I kick him off the boat? And of course, Jesus says, no, not 7 times, but 77 times. I think if you forgave someone for the same thing 7 times, wives, I'm speaking to you, if you forgive your husband 7 times for the same thing, you're a saint, right? But 77, who is that saintly? Nobody. Nobody. Now, these are not just little annoying things like they are in relationships sometimes. This is not smacking your gum, right? This is not chewing with your mouth open at dinner. This is not leaving the toilet seat up. You know who you are. These are serious sins that Peter's talking about, right? A serious affront to someone in the community. And it has to be taken seriously. Now, in the parable, I'm talking about the magnitude of the forgiveness here. In the parable, what does it say? How many talents does it say? I don't remember. Look it up for me, somebody. How many talents does he owe? How many? 10,000 talents. 10,000 talents. In dollars, that turns out to be roughly 8 billion with a B. That's how much he owes, right? Now, you could never really, very, 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 you could count on one hand the kind of people who can pay back that kind of debt. 99.99999% of the people could never pay that kind of debt. You could keep me in prison my whole life and 10 more lifetimes, right? $8 billion he's forgiven. How much does he have to forgive? What's it say? 100 denarii. That turns out to be $15,000. Now, I'm not saying that's not a lot of money. It is. But compared to 8 billion, right? The magnitude of the sin of the affront is so much greater that he was forgiven, and yet he won't even forgive the little bitty thing, right? This is like somebody doing something horrible to you, and then you not forgiving them the smallest thing. Or me not forgiving them the smallest thing. And that's, I'm telling you, churches, it happens, man. You can't believe how many fights happen in churches over little things, you know, lighting or words. Or it's just, and that's just who we are as a people. So the magnitude, forgiven so much, but can't forgive even just a little bit. Now, the second thing I want to notice is the order that this forgiveness happens, in which this forgiveness happens. Notice what did not happen. It was not, you have forgiven, so I will forgive. It wasn't, you have forgiven a little bit, so now I'm going to forgive you a lot. It wasn't that. It was the opposite of that, right? You were forgiven already, therefore, now you must forgive, or must learn to forgive. In other words, your actions do not determine your status or favor with God. You don't have to do anything for God to forgive you. You have already been forgiven. I think that's the hardest thing for us, though, right? I've been preaching this and preaching this and preaching that. I'm going to keep on preaching it. You are a beloved child of God. That's the first thing you have to know, that you are loved. The second thing, and this is so hard for people, is that you're forgiven. There's nothing you've ever done that is not forgiven of God. Nothing. I don't care what it is. It's so hard sometimes for people to believe that. Because we think, oh, I know you've never sinned like I have. And believe me, that's really true in our case, Shirley. You've never sinned like I have. But I'm telling you, if God can forgive anything. We just oftentimes forget to accept that forgiveness. Okay. Your responsibility is to act like you have been forgiven in your life. To know the great debt that has been forgiven you, so that you can forgive others. Now, this week for me, it came into this context. This made it kind of real for me. And that's what parables should do, you know. When you get a parable, it's not like a one-on-one thing. It's like that should color your thinking about life. So when you think about debt and forgiveness, in all different places you encounter it, you should think about this parable. Now here's what struck me this week. Down south, over the last month, we've had two horrible, horrible storms, right? Harvey and Irma. How much damage have they caused? I've seen estimates. 50 billion, 80 billion. I saw one as much as $150 billion. Now, imagine this parable applied to those catastrophic losses. Imagine those people who are locked into a lease for an apartment or a house that they can no longer occupy, but they're still bound by the terms of the lease, right? Imagine the landlord saying, it's okay, I let you out of the lease. I release you. I don't know if it's happening or not happening. I'm just saying, imagine that this parable applied to that. Imagine the person who owns their own home. Imagine how many the houses were destroyed, no longer to be used, had to be torn down and raised back up. Okay, so imagine your situation. Imagine your mortgage, right? If that amount, you still had to pay it, you owe it to the bank, but you have to build a new house on top of it and add another mortgage. How many of us could survive such a disaster? What if your bank came to you and said, you know what, I release you from that first mortgage and I'll loan you enough money to do another? See, here's what I'm afraid of. Because I'm 62 years old, I've lived, right? And I've seen it happen in my lifetime 2 or 3 times. Usually, the big companies, the big banks, get bailed out. And the little guy, at the end, doesn't. I'm just telling you the truth as I see it, right? And I'm thinking of these thousands, hundreds of thousands of people with individual mortgages and leases, and I'm thinking of the banks Nothing against, I love banks. I love bankers. God bless you all. Thank you for doing it. But I'm saying, when all that debt rolls up to whoever owns it at the highest level, because banks, when they get mortgages, they sell it to other banks, right? It all gets rolled up. Somebody loses $150 billion. I'm going to guess that guy gets taken care of. Person, I should say. I'm more worried about the people at the bottom getting their debt. And that's how I see this parable. I'll just leave you with that to say that's how parables ought to work in our lives. And we then are called to say, I'm going to fight whatever I call my congressman, whatever I need to do to make sure those people get taken care of too. I'm not saying people shouldn't be made whole, banks and everybody else, but I'm saying let's make sure the little person gets taken care of too. Okay. The takeaway. Here's the thing. We've all done things in our lives that we would like to be forgiven for. Many of them we've asked for forgiveness. Maybe there's some things that we haven't. Is there a relationship in your life with God or with someone else that you need to ask forgiveness for something and you haven't been able to do that? I'm going to ask you this week to think about one thing that you'd like to ask forgiveness for. And imagine a way that you might actually come to terms with that in that relationship. One thing that you'd like to be forgiven of. We all have it. Now, and the second thing I'd like you to do is imagine the one thing that you should have forgiven already for someone else, but you haven't. You can't let go of it. You just can't let go of that deep hurt. Maybe they've never come to you and asked for forgiveness. But most of us, or all of us probably, have that one thing, or many things. But I'm just thinking, would you think of one thing that you need to forgive someone else for, and another thing that you need to be forgiven for? And imagine a way this week that you might start to approach those problems in those relationships and try to resolve them. I'll tell you why. Not being forgiven and not forgiving are opposite sides of the same coin, and they both make you sick. They both make your soul sick. God created you to have joy in your life. And when you are not forgiving or being forgiven, your soul cannot be as joyful as it was intended to be. And I'm just asking you, sweep that away. You can do it. If it's with God, sit down with God today. Go get a cup of coffee. Go on your porch. Say, God, forgive me today. And I guarantee you one thing, you will be forgiven. Right? If you don't know that and you're carrying around some burden, come to me and I will do the sacrament of reconciliation. And you can be sure that you're forgiven in that. Right? But most of you don't need that. Most of you just need to ask for forgiveness. Maybe it's a spouse, maybe it's an ex-spouse, maybe it's a friend or an ex-friend. Something that you would like to resolve. The second thing is, can you forgive someone? That person probably never coming back to you. Probably never going to come to you and ask for forgiveness. But you're carrying that resentment in your heart, and it's making you sick. And I'm saying, this might be the week to let go of it. Okay. You might want some help talking that through. Here's the thing. I'm here all week. I've penciled out all day tomorrow. I'll be in my office except for lunch, and I invite you to call me or come by. I'm here to talk.